G'day, I've had a bit of a break from this project. I'm going to knock the bearings out of the crankcase today. I don't think I got a good shot of this crankshaft while it was in the engine. The big end is buggered. I don't know how it must have shot all its rollers out. But it's interesting, the gudgeon pin at this end actually seems like a fairly nice fit still in the small end. Doesn't look all that damaged, but it doesn't matter. Look, the whole thing's rubbish, and you can't buy a new you got to buy the whole lot, because the crankshaft is pressed together with a pin pressed through here into these two halves. With it busted like this, that pin will be busted even if you buy a new rod and press it apart. It's not something you fix when it's not a rare thing that there are people that can do it when you've got a rare bike that needs fixing. But anyway, that's what causes a crank to bend like that. Would take a fair bit of force, I would have thought, and possibly the bike may well have had to be being ridden at the time so that it had the momentum or the inertia of the whole bike running for the piston to crash, and the force of the crank coming round to give it the big tweak it's got to bend the conrod like that. I don't know. It's hard to imagine what happened. I've undone this oil pump. I'll show you. And put the cog back on it. When I had it apart without the cog, it was difficult to actually turn the shaft. Pushed it a little bit and it did sort of clock backwards and forwards initially. And I've put the cog on it now, and yes, I can turn it, but I suspect metal has got into this and I won't use it again. I will use the screws if I don't find cap heads to do the same job. Yeah, I damaged two of the screws when I took this off the other engine, but you could immediately turn the shaft on the other one and it was as smooth as silk, so this one was not, because it's had some chunks go through it. So I will bag that up and put it in the kit. I have at this stage removed and bagged up the main shaft and the lay shaft on the other side and all of the forks and shifting mechanism. I haven't actually bagged up the barrel. I didn't release the barrel on this one. Before disassembly, I knew you didn't have to, but I'm going to release it now that I've got to clear shit out of it. So I'm going to take everything off this casting and give it a good clean. I've decided to completely dismantle this crankcase casting, take out all of the bearings when I can. I'm hoping I can tap them out. Some of them have retaining bolts in them and things. This roller bearing here, for example. I want to take them all out so I can thoroughly wash them and also determine whether the bearings in the other crankcase are better. I actually suspect they might be, and so I'll see how I go about removing all of these. I don't want to damage any of them, and so I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to use a hot air gun to heat the casting to hopefully make removal of some of them a little easier. But this shot pretty much shows everything on the inside. I'll just flip it over. that's what it looks like on the outside. These pictures are pretty much reference for me when I make sure when I put it back together. Well, there it is with all the bearings out. I'm not going to say knocked out because basically they fell out. The book says to warm the case in an oven to about 100 degrees C, and then with the case with the bearings down, tap it onto a soft wooden plate. Well, I've just tapped it on my little box there upside down, and well, they came out. Now I didn't use an oven either. I used a hot air gun like that, and I concentrated heat around the main crankshaft bearing and a little bit of warmth over the rest so it wasn't dead cold. But to get this up to 100 degrees, it's not any hotter than it would be when the motor's running. So I wasn't too concerned about warping. I had the hot air gun set to about 500 degrees, but you don't use a flame to do this job. They suggest that, well, the hot air I don't think was going to damage it. And anyway, the main bearing there has a bit of mass to it, and so with a bit of a tapping the whole case on this flat surface upside down, that bearing fell out into the box. I then put heat around these two bearings, and in little time at all I saw that this one started to work its way out and dropped into the box. The smaller one took a bit longer. I heated this side and the other side with a bit more concentrated hot air, and both these ones I don't think were even at 100 degrees because spit wasn't sizzling when I put a bit on my finger and dabbed it on these areas. But this one only came out when I did get this area hot, and I was mainly heating the other side, and I could see that my spit was going to sizzle on that end plate, which is probably only thin. And when that did, it then dropped out as well. And without even concentrating much heat on the rear bearing, after I'd been focused on this one for a while, I looked across at this one and saw it was 3/4 of the way out. I just moved the whole case across on my block and gave that a couple more taps across here, and that fell out. And not only did that fall out, so did the oil seal. I thought there was a lip between this bearing and the oil seal, but the oil seal fell out in this direction too, and so the oil seal's come out totally undamaged. That left the roller bearing in here, and so I heated all around this housing here quite a lot and focused some heat from the other side around the greater area, and had to get it to sort of 100 degrees spit temperature, and with a bit more knocking across here with it flipped over, I started to see it coming out, and persevered for quite a while knocking on that one, and then it had moved out about 6 millimeters, and I was able to get a small punch down behind it at that stage from the other side, and it didn't take much at all, just a knock on either side 2 or 3 times, and it crept out. I was very conscious I didn't want to damage the wall of that needle bearing. I'm sure I haven't. So look, I think that all happened a lot easier than I was expecting, so I'm going to go ahead with the other 94 case, the other half of the 94 case, and get it all cleaned, get all the bearings out of it, and then I'll focus on doing a thorough clean of both of these cases. This is looking good, but even a little bit around the outside, so that when it's put back together it looks nice. So that's what I'll move on with. This is just a photo basically of the other case before I start removing bearings. This one's held in by a couple of fixtures. Rear bearings the same, crankshaft bearings the same. There's an intermediate one here which is probably the main output shaft of the gearbox, and this is the main output shaft of the sub-transmission. That's a fairly big bearing. It may even be bigger, or I'll have to check that those aren't the same size, that I don't mix them up. But there's nothing else to dismantle off this case, just a couple of screws here it looks like, so I'll begin with that. Okay, all the bearings are out of this half. They all came out easier. If anything, the crankcase one was the recalcitrant one, and the oil seal for the rear bearing didn't come out, and then when I had a close look at it, it appeared to me to be installed the wrong way around. Now this bike had new, I think new universal joints on the back of it, and I suspect when they were changed along with the boots that the new oil seal was put here and installed back to front. I don't think this bike has done only 1700 kilometres like the odometer suggests. I think it's done a bit more than that, but yeah, I believe that it's had new universal joints, and that oil seal had been changed. But otherwise everything else has come out clean, and I'm happy to keep going. This has got two oil seals, little ones for the shift levers here and here. That one's the reverse and one's the gearbox. There's another sub-transmission one out here somewhere on the outer case. I think they're all the same size. I'm going to go and blow up the photos I've taken of these, get the numbers off them, and see how readily available they are from the normal bearing place. There's also a seal around the crankcase underneath the recoil starter, which I will investigate at some point before I go and buy seals. The number on these oil seals is 12-22-9, which would be 12 millimeters inside diameter, 22 outside diameter, and 9 millimeters thick. That there is the spare motor now completely stripped, and the bearings knocked out of the crankcase halves. They all came out with the same hot air gun heating the casing and giving it a good wrap on the block of wood base that I had it sitting on. With the bearings down, they just basically fell out when the aluminium was up around 100 degrees. So that one's all come apart. Now those bearings never had metal go through them. Some of them feel a little bit gritty because I think some of the dirty sludgy oil that was kicking around inside the box got into some of them during the dismantling process, and so I think they all need to be washed out with kerosene and given a spin, but they generally all feel better than the ones that came out of the 94 engine. So I had to completely dismantle this to get the bearings. All these bearings I'll fit over in the 94 engine crankcase castings, and I will use the 94 crankcase side covers because they're all machined together. These are parts of the 94 engine. Bearings and things in the top there. The two halves are just sort of sitting together on that bucket. These are the two crankshafts. The one closest to me is the spare engine crankshaft, and the other one without any of the gears and clutch basket things on it is the 94 blown up engine crankshaft. The 94 crankcases now are going to get a thorough wash in kerosene and soap and hot water and dried out, all the air, all the oil passages hopefully located and blown out with compressed air. And then all of the bearings, the ones out of the 94 engine and the ones out of the spare engine, are all going to be checked side by side. One thing that is better is the 94 rear axle seals are in better condition than the spare engine's rear axle seals. I think the spare engine uni joints on the rear axle didn't have boots on them, and so there was more dirt ingress. So the rear final drive sprocket is likely to remain the 94 version, and possibly the 94 rear axle bearings will get used again, because the oil seals possibly didn't keep the dirt out as well as they could have, or as they did on the 94. The spare engine's rear axle seals aren't as good as the 94's axle seals, and that translates that the bearings possibly, depending whether the bearings got metal in them, being right at the back of the engine, maybe they didn't. But they're all things that I just got to make a judgment decision on when I'm reassembling. I've got the choice of two sets of everything, and that's it's only really the crankcase of the spare engine with its damaged starter motor area and the crankshaft of the blown engine that has the problem. While I've been away interstate, I've got a new piston, oversized piston, and I've had the spare engine's cylinder bored out 0.5 millimetre oversized to suit. And so when I get all of this bottom end stuff back together, I've got gear to go ahead and do the top end of the engine I build with gear that will make it like brand new. So that's enough for tonight. It's been great to get back on this project. Get out to your shed and have some fun yourself.